Sydney Catholic Schools is proud to present So You Want to Be a Journalist. Our guest today is one of the country's best known and most popular journalists and newsreaders. She's currently a presenter on 9 News Sydney, anchoring the 6pm bulletin on Friday and Saturday nights. Prior to this, she captivated audiences nearly every day of the week as a co-host and news presenter on 9's iconic breakfast program, Today. She has worked across the country for various broadcast and radio stations, receiving multiple awards and accolades, including a RA Award, radio's highest award, in her debut year as Australia's best newcomer to Metropolitan Radio. She is also the only Australian news presenter to have presented the late news bulletin on each of the 3 major commercial TV networks. Passionate about charities relating to young people, she is an ambassador for Redkite and School for Life in Rays.
Please welcome to the studio Georgie Gardner. I'm Tony Farley, Executive Director of Sydney Catholic Schools, and with me today is our student presenter, Thomas, from Marist Catholic College, Penshurst. Georgie, thanks for joining us today.
Tony, Thomas, thank you so much for having me.
So, Georgie, a typical day in the life of a newsreader, what's it like?
Well, funnily enough, Tony, there's probably no such thing really as a typical day because every news day is different, and it's one of the things I love most about my job. You can have a day that is just filled with disaster and tragedy and really big news events. Conversely, you can have days where it's really quite quiet and not a lot seems to be going on. But in terms of, I guess, sort of the timetable of the day, my general routine is to get up and read as much news as I can, just be across breakfast radio, listening to talk back, the issues that are really burning, that people are discussing, being aware of if there's any particular event or anything scheduled that's big for that day. And then I would usually get in around late morning, and that begins the day, run through hair and makeup. Well, I wish I did run. This old face needs a bit more than a run, but that takes about 45 minutes, and it's a lot of fun, I've got to say. Find me a girl who doesn't like having her hair and makeup done, or boy. Prior to that, I would have had some phone calls with the newsroom to discuss the sort of the editorial process for the day, and we talk about which stories we think should take precedence, how we're going to attack it, whether something should require a full reporter and camera operator to go out and make a full what we call package of a story, or whether it just warrants more of a voiceover and something that's briefer. So that's all discussed. And then I do some various radio spots and news updates across the afternoon. And then, of course, the main bulletin at 6 p.m. Off air at 7 p.m. and pretty much home by sort of 7:30, 7:45.
So when you go home, do the family talk about your performance?
Never. No, I've got teenagers who couldn't be less interested actually in what I do for work.
They don't watch your news stories?
No. I can't remember the last time they watched. I mean, they're very aware of what I do. They probably used to see a lot more of me, to be honest, when I did the Today Show, because that was, breakfast and getting up and going to school, and they'd catch a bit of me then. But no, I don't really believe they. But I think, this is interesting, and I think we're going to talk about this. The audience, the way we receive news now has changed so dramatically. So I think that's probably quite typical of 17 and 18-year-olds. They're not sitting down at 6 p.m. to watch the news. They're getting their news in a whole lot of other different ways.
Let's just talk about how you came to this business, what was the motivation? What was the love that you had that drew you to news and journalism?
I'm a communicator. I love people. I'm very curious by nature. Someone who's always, it drives my children mad. I talk to strangers in the street. I'm interested. People, everyone has a story. I'm very intrigued to know what makes people tick. And I think that is just a mandatory trait, really, in my business. You've got to enjoy communicating. You've got to ask questions and be curious. Of course, I have a great interest in news and current affairs and politics. That's a huge part of it as well. But at the core, I think it's curiosity, and I think it's the ability to communicate and the love of communication.
You talked about staying informed, so checking the news sources. There's so much now available. You must decide to go to particular sources that are curated. I mean, how do you manage and navigate the incredible diversity of sources that exist today in the media?
It's such a good question, Tony, and it's really hard. It's really difficult. If I find that hard as an informed journalist in terms of having a pretty good understanding of the source of a news site, who owns that news site, all of that sort of thing, and at times I'm confused. I can't imagine what it's like. And this is something that I'm super passionate about, because having good, accurate, fair, balanced media is essential. I can't overstate that. But the problem is, because we now have, as you say, such a splintered array of information, people don't really know whether it's truthful, whether it's accurate, whether it's balanced. And it's hard. So in answer to your question, I try and read and watch and listen to a broad cross-section, and I make sure that I'm hearing all angles and, am aware, for example, that if I'm reading something from News Limited, just understanding that that's Murdoch-owned, definitely leans to the right, as opposed to, say, the ABC, which the ABC should, of course, be very balanced, and some suggest it leans a bit to the left, but, maybe that's where you read The Guardian, or just understanding where the source of your information is coming from. And I think having a very broad cross-section. I'm really proud to say, actually, that at Nine, which, of course, now we're the biggest media organisation now in the country, insofar as we have the Macquarie Radio Network, we have digital, we have newspapers, Sydney Morning Herald in Sydney, The Age in Melbourne, and of course Nine TV. And I really do pride myself on us being hopefully always very accurate and balanced and a very reliable news source. And I can say that in the 22 years I've been at Channel 9, I've never, ever had anyone come and tap me on the shoulder and try and give me some editorial direction, which is a great relief.
It's a really important point. If you think about, say, the 60s or the 70s, and the idea was the news was being read with this is the news, not the opinion, I think we really have drifted into a polarised environment, and including on some of the mainstream platforms. So I think it's really important for us to see that there's a news organisation that's large and that is committed to that idea of this is the news. We're trying to give you the facts for you to make a decision yourself.
Exactly. And what I've noticed, particularly, say, in the last 5 years, what has really blurred is, as you say, opinion pieces and straight up and down news pieces. And you have to, I know myself when I'm reading, for example, the Sydney Morning Herald, I might start reading an article and I'll say to myself, hang on a second. And I go back to the top to work out whether it's news or opinion. And there's nothing wrong with an opinion piece. An opinion piece can often be very interesting, but at the end of the day, you have to understand that that's one person's opinion as opposed to a fact-based, balanced piece of journalism.
So let's move to something completely different insofar as the emotional impact of the work. Now, you come to work each day and you're a mother, a partner, you've got a whole life outside of work. And then you move into the news. And as you said before, some of that news is incredibly intense and tragic and meaningful for people in ways that we can only imagine. How do you manage the emotional impact of the work that you're doing and go back home and live life as you want to and just day to day?
You're right. The news is often grim, and people often remind me of that. It seems that that tends to make up the bulk of a news bulletin these days. It's often really horrible stuff. And when it's something that really hits close to home, and that has happened on a few occasions that I can think of, it's a case of clicking into just a certain headspace and seeing myself very much as the conduit. I mean, I'm a sensitive person, so it's not that I don't feel the emotion. There are days where I have to really breathe and just focus and get through it. And then as soon as it goes to the tape piece, I can sort of collapse in a bit of a heap and perhaps wipe the tear away and move on. But at times it is hard. And there are many, many nights where when I get in the car and I drive home and I think a lot about what I've just read. And it is, I guess, at best, an opportunity for me to never lose sight of how fragile life can be, how much tragedy there is in the world, and how every day is an absolute gift.
To live and love in the moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's just talk about newsreaders. So for us, those of us where I'm looking at you through the screen and just thinking this person's got it all together, they don't miss a beat.
Oh, that's not true.
They seem to never age.
Flattery will get you everywhere, Tony.
No. I just tell the truth. What are some misconceptions about newsreaders and newsreading?
That we memorise the news. We absolutely don't. We're reading an auto cue. And that's not to say that, I mean, I can only speak for my own conduct, but I'm very involved with the writing. So I write things very much to my style, because my intention is for it to be as conversational and as palatable as possible. And I think that when news presenters just talk to you as opposed to talking at you, it's far easier to absorb the information. We definitely don't memorise it. However, I certainly tweak it and write it and put little asterisks, or I might write something in capital letters that I know I really want to emphasise, commas, all that sort of thing to assist my delivery. And possibly the other misconception is I often get asked about what I wear from the waist down. And the reality is
it's just such an inappropriate question.
Well, I find it quite curious, but it's definitely, not bike shorts or hot pants. I can give you the tip, but it's usually just, a pretty boring pair of comfortable trousers or a skirt. And I must say I do now very often wear sneakers though. That's come as a result of COVID, when we all just stopped wearing stupid high heels and started wearing sneakers. So I do often read the news with my sneakers on. And
that's very contemporary, Georgie.
Thank you.
I think the term is all the rage.
I'll tell the teenagers.
Yeah. Look, I just wanted to pick up on that issue of media change and the environment that we're in as opposed to what it might have been 30, 40 or 50 years ago. Where do you think it's all going?
Oh, I don't know. It's interesting. There's a story twirling around at the moment about banning TikTok, because I mean it still just leaves me cold thinking that people get their news from TikTok. But there you go. I'm torn on that, because there's a part of me that thinks I want younger people to be interested in world affairs and news, and if that's their source and that's their best means of getting it, great. But I often wonder about, as we touched on before, the accuracy and the source and all that sort of thing. I don't know. What I do know is that appointment television, which is how you would describe sitting down and watching the 6 p.m. news go to air live, is obviously on the way out. People are streaming their news. They're getting it in all other forms and ways, and they're watching it on their terms and according to their timetable. So I guess that's becoming the norm. But look, I feel very grateful that for the bulk of my career, I've had that reliability, I guess, of what we term appointment news. And I think there's still a lot to be said about watching something live as it's happening, particularly if it's breaking news. So I can't really see how that could ever change, but I guess it's a case of watch this space.
The history is unwritten. It'll be fascinating. Just two more quick questions. One is, do you have a teacher that you had at school, or teachers at school that influenced you?
I have a number of teachers, and I'm forever grateful for the influence that teachers had on me. In fact, I had the great joy a few years ago on the Today Show where we brought one of my teachers onto the set. We actually flew her over from Perth. I grew up in Perth. And she was my theatre arts teacher in year 11 and 12. And she was just, because my dream was to be an actress, and she just embraced me and gave me so much courage and confidence. And she was enormous influence. But there were several, Tony, and I was thinking a lot about this. I have so much respect for teachers, and we need to support them and salute them. Anyone who chooses to go into the teaching profession, to me, should be revered and applauded and supported. We need to better remunerate our teachers and give them that level of respect, because it's a tough gig. But I guess it's also possibly one of the most rewarding jobs, because you know that you can just plant that seed or make that comment or show that interest that can be life-changing. And I get a bit emotional thinking about some of my teachers, because the ones who I really adored were the ones who got me, who understood
absolutely.
me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because I was an A-grade student. In fact, I didn't excel at anything really at school. I was a very average student. But they saw something, and I'm forever grateful, because it's just those little pieces of, those little nuggets of either giving you that confidence or that boost, or perhaps setting you off on a different train of thought, or believing in you, that can be actually life-changing.
Well, it's very interesting, because we're in talking to people, that's the story often. Look, I got along in school, but I was no star student. But I found something that was really important to me and that I loved and I was passionate about, and that's why I'm here today. So that's great to hear. One last question before we go to the Pressure Point 60-second round, I should say. How you're involved in charity work with Red Kite, School for Life and Raise. You're in a position where lots of people will be asking you to do things which you would love to do. How do you choose what you do and where, because time is finite in your life and you have to allocate according to what you can do and your other responsibilities. So how do you choose?
So interestingly, that's precisely what my life was like, particularly when I was on the Today Show. It's very hard, but I decided, rather than sort of a bit of a, for want of another word, scattergun approach, I decided to really hone in on charities that I was particularly passionate about. And for me, those three all involve young people. I love being with young people. It's one of the things I love most about my job, because I sit on a production desk and there are people from, sort of early 20s right through to late 60s. And I particularly love being around younger people. And Red Kite is all about supporting families when a child's diagnosed with cancer. I mean, that's a no-brainer. That is the worst possible news any parent can get. And Red Kite is just this extraordinary organisation that goes in from the point of diagnosis right through, just supporting financially, emotionally, with mental health, counselling for siblings, you name it, they do it, and it's extraordinary. School for Life is wonderful. This is a Sydney woman by the name of Annabelle Chauncey, who decided when she was doing a bit of relief teaching, aged 19 in Kenya, that when she crossed the border into Uganda and saw all these young children walking around aimlessly, that something needed to be done. Why weren't these kids in school? It was because there were no schools. So she's gone over there and built schools in Uganda. I've had the great thrill and treat of flying over there myself and seeing it, and it is mind-blowing what she's doing. That whole notion that if you educate a child, you can educate them out of poverty, and it's just wonderful. And then Raise is a Sydney-born organisation that is all about mentoring, and it's wonderful because it's bringing together mentors and mentees. There are so many people with so much wisdom and life experience who have so much to give, but they don't know where to direct all of that. And so to bring a mentor together with a young person who's struggling and needs a bit of love and interest and all the things we were just talking about, it's a brilliant program where they are brought together. And I think that is a great starting point to help eliminate some of these terrible issues that our young people are facing these days.
Such great work in all three charities. Now, Thomas, it's over to you for the lightning round.
Yes. All right, let's begin.
Should I put my seatbelt on, Thomas?
Buckle up, buckle up, Georgie. You're in for a bumpy ride.
All right. What did you want to be in primary school?
An actress.
What was your first job?
Babysitter.
What is one thing you can't start your morning without?
Walking my dog.
What's the last thing that you Googled?
Oh, probably a recipe. Yeah, I'm sure it would have been a recipe.
What was your favorite book?
The Alchemist. It's the only book I've read more than once.
And what's your favorite meal?
Oh, this is tough. There are about 10, but I'll go with linguine marinara.
Oh, that's delicious. Describe yourself in 3 words.
3. Okay. Compassionate, efficient, positive.
That's lovely.
Thank you.
A dog or a cat person?
Well, I've got both. Don't tell Flo, but I'm choosing Wilbur, the Portuguese water dog.
And if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
A superpower? Oh, again, I'd love lots of superpowers. Curing childhood cancer.
That's lovely.
Did I make it?
You
that
certainly
was just
did.
the
Oh, you
timer.
did. You did.
Oh,
you absolutely.
Thank goodness.
Now you've just got to do it.
Yes, yes.
We were out at a school yesterday, and we asked this question of the students. So some of them wanted to be really strong and that sort of thing. About half of the answers were about kindness and caring and sort of love, and it was really surprising. And it really came through in terms of that. Mm. So your answer is consistent with 50% of the student population of that school, which is about doing something great for people. Mm. So it's a pretty fantastic superpower.
Mm. Mm. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Georgie, your education journey seemed to be quite diverse, from attending school in Perth and studying in Milan and then pursuing media in Western Australia. How do you think your educational experience shaped your career?
I was really lucky. I went to a government primary school that was just exceptional, outstanding teachers, a really good mix of different backgrounds and ethnicities, and I actually thrived. It was co-ed, thrived in that environment. Then I did a private girls' school for my senior school, which really suited me, I've got to say. I think I was quite self-conscious as a teenage girl, and I think I actually thrived in being in an all-girl environment. Then I went straight out of school, I went and lived in Italy for a couple of years where I worked as a nanny. And that was an extraordinary experience because I didn't speak a word of Italian. I didn't know anyone. And it just thrust me into a whole different environment, obviously. Very steep learning curve. And it was the making of me in a lot of ways. And then I went back to Perth and I actually went to WAPA, the Academy of Performing Arts, where I did a media performance course. And I actually had already auditioned for the acting because I wanted to be an actor and I didn't get in. And I thought, well, I'll do this media course and then I'll have that as the backup when I pursue the acting. Within about 2 weeks of doing the media course, something inside me just went, bang, this is actually what you are meant to do. And that's how my career then began from doing that.
That's really cool.
So in other words, it wasn't what I anticipated. It certainly wasn't linear, but it was a case of going with what my gut was telling me. And when I think about it, I think I was very switched on really because I'd had a very turbulent home life growing up. And I'd come to the realization that acting is a very tough industry. There's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of knockback. You need to be very resilient. And I didn't feel I had the emotional constitution to pursue it. But what I loved about the media was that it was bringing to the fore my love of communicating, my interest in performance and being with people and asking questions. And it's funny because this didn't occur to me until years later. But as a young child, I used to walk around with a little tape deck and interview my siblings and my parents and drive everyone mental and do voiceovers for cat food commercials as I was feeding the cat. I mean, how annoying. But the point is, it was there from the beginning. My mother tells the story that apparently when I was a baby, barely 1, 2, at the little clinic that she used to go and they'd fill in your book and just do all the checks and make sure you were thriving and growing. And apparently they took recordings of me doing the alphabet because my voice at a very young age was very clear and I was very articulate. And go figure, I've become a newsreader.
My son Ned was much the same, and around the time there was a cryptosporidium outbreak in Sydney, and so he was not even 18 months old. So we taught him to say cryptosporidium, and that was quite the party trick.
Yeah, of
So,
course,
yeah.
of course. Well, there you go. What's he doing?
He's a doctor. He's a second year out. He's a doctor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So
he's a communicator.
he is.
And,
yeah.
you know, how insightful to be interested in cryptosporidium at the age of 18 months.
I think he wants to be a surgeon, not a.
But it's interesting, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it is.
And I think that just,
Yeah.
to me, it was all there waiting. But I hadn't. And this is where we must encourage our young people to tap into what lights your fire, what excites you when you're lying in bed at night, what's giving you butterflies because you just can't wait to explore it. And I think we have this notion that we've got to shoehorn every child into this one narrow pathway, and it's wrong. Tune into what lights your fire and what gives you joy, and the rest will work itself out.
I remember when I was younger, I used to I made up my own like advertising company. It was called like, I don't know, Monkey See, Monkey Do or something like that. And I was like advertising products and stuff like that.
There
And
you go.
I think that's just like, I feel like it's my inspiration, and it's just something that like from a young age, like I've discovered and I just wanted to do. And now it's like I'm learning about it in business studies at school, and my teachers are really helping me with that, and I'm really enjoying it.
How fabulous. And may I add that you have a very beautiful broadcasting voice.
Thank you. Really?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
There you go.
To the next question. What skills do you think are essential for someone aspiring to be a successful newsreader?
Well, probably a lot of what we've already touched on. Curiosity, interest in news and current affairs, the ability to communicate, the ability to listen is essential. We're born with 2 ears and 1 mouth. My advice is use them proportionately.
I'm staying silent.
Sorry. At what point do you realize you wanted a job in the media and journalism, and can you pinpoint a defining moment?
Well, as I mentioned, it was probably 2 weeks into that media performance course where it all just started to gel, and I could see that it brought together all the things that I love, and I think brought to the fore things that innately came very naturally to me, which was asking questions, talking, and a lot of people have said to me, "Oh, where did you learn to speak the way you speak?" Well, to be honest, I've never learnt to it's the way I speak. It's come in handy for news reading to have a clear speaking voice. But you know, I think also when I think back to that time when I lived in Italy, I used to, this is obviously well before mobile phones, any ability to be watching a screen when you're on public transport. And I used to, at every opportunity, get on a train and just go to a different village or a different town to explore. I was very curious, and I loved Italy from the moment I arrived. It's still the most, I'm still incredibly passionate about it. And I used to sit and observe. And so I know that I have an ability I have insight. And I think that's something that is really underestimated, to be able to walk into a room and size it up and be aware of what's going on around you. And sadly, I think with the advent of social media, I mean, we see it every day. You walk past a bus stop or you're on a train. Everyone has got their head down, absorbed in this screen. And there is so much that you're missing. And I know for me, when I'm conducting an interview, the years of doing live television, it is so important to pick up on these things that people are not necessarily verbalizing, but it might be in their body language or the way they are responding with other things other than language. And I know for me that is something that I have really brought to the fore. And by living in a country where I didn't speak the language, I had to rely very heavily on it because I couldn't partake in conversation, but I could watch and pick up on other signals and signs. And I think that is, for me, has been incredibly helpful and a very useful tool. Does that make sense? I'm probably rambling. But
No, not at all. And I think one of the things is nothing breaks my heart more than to see a little baby in a stroller not looking out at the world, but looking at a tablet, a device, when in fact to experience the world and the physicality of it and the beauty and the smells and the sights and the movement is part of their cognitive development. So my wife and I see this and just think, oh dear, please.
Well, and to take that a step further, Tony, there is a lot of evidence now that it is a big reason as to why a lot of people are lacking empathy, because that is exactly how empathy is developed. It's when I couldn't agree. I mean, I'm an absolute baby magnet. I adore babies and young kids, and there's nothing more gorgeous than when you're in a lift and you catch their eye and you smile at them and you're communicating and they're learning. But if their world around them is reduced to, as you say, watching Peppa Pig on the iPad, it's
tragic.
It's frightening.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, I'm just glad that they don't cry at me in the lift. Anyway, you do better than I do, Georgie.
But that's important as well.
It is.
How did your time at school help embark you on your future job? And what are some tips for aspiring journalists at school?
Oh, well, just keep asking questions. And even if, as I've explained, it wasn't mapped out for me, I sort of fell into it really. If you're interested in people and issues and how the world how things tick, and if you believe, as I do very strongly, in truth and getting factual, very necessary information about what's going on in the world, then journalism is a wonderful industry. It's a wonderful career. There's a lot of there are so many areas to get into, whether it be print, digital, electronic. So there's so many facets to it in that sense, but there's also so many areas. I mean, if you've got a passion for the world of medicine, I mean, being a good medical reporter or journalist is a really interesting area. Or it might be sport, or it might be politics. I mean, there's so many areas. And I feel incredibly blessed to have had the career I've had, because every day is different, which is what I love, and it's incredibly interesting.
What's the best fictional depiction of, say, a newsroom you've ever seen? Be it movie or book or anything else? Yeah,
well, I mean, the recent series on the ABC called The Newsreader was frighteningly accurate in a lot of ways in the era of the very, bullying and bombastic masculinity. I mean, I've certainly experienced my fair share of that. Thankfully, times have changed. But but there were things about that were really not very accurate. So my advice to anyone, if they're interested, would be to actually come into a real newsroom and see how it works. It's not as, I think a lot of people think it's very glamorous. There's a lot of sort of harder parts, rougher parts that come with it. But there's also a lot of fun. I mean, I love the presentation side of things, but there's a lot that comes before that.
Have you ever seen the TV show Great News?
No.
It's really cool. It's like a comedy about a woman and her mother working in a newsroom as like a journalist, and they present news stories. And I always also thought that was fascinating.
Oh, I must see that.
I'll check that out.
You have to let me know where to watch that.
On Netflix. Tina Fey was in it.
Oh, I love Tina Fey.
Yeah.
There was
Thank you, Thomas. You brought that to my attention. I will absolutely go home and watch that.
Yeah, I always thought I really like to connect with movies, TV shows, and I always thought that was a really good one.
Excellent. Thank you for the hot tip.
You're welcome. And the next question. What different roles in journalism did you consider, and what attracted you towards working as a news presenter?
So I started off in radio, actually, I got my cadetship at a little radio station in Newcastle, New South Wales, and I was everything. So I was reporting, producing, You know, and in those days, when you did a phone interview, you would literally be doing it on what's called a reel-to-reel machine, and you would physically be splicing the ribbon of tape and sticking it together to get the grab for your news bulletin. It was very physical. These days, it's all digital. And I was running around reporting, wrapping my head around all the local issues in Newcastle because it was a new city for me. I didn't know a lot about it, and then I was news reading as well. So it was a very, very steep learning curve, but I was so thrilled to be thrown into it because I learnt so much and got to experience all different aspects of journalism. I then came down to Sydney and knocked on doors at radio stations in Sydney and got into radio in Sydney. And then I kind of fell into TV, to be honest. It wasn't part of the grand plan. I was loving radio. I still love radio. But a friend was working as a reporter at Channel 10 and he kept saying, come and try this. And he wore me down. And after a year, I went and auditioned and got a job. And I was the medical reporter. So I used to do all the rounds for the stories that were medical related, which I loved. And then sort of almost really by default, it was one of those situations where someone was sick and they said, quick, jump in and read some news updates on the set. And that freaked me out a bit because it was a whole different discipline, but it came very naturally. And they then, I think, saw me more in that role. And so I then became a full-time newsreader. I went to Channel 7 for 4 years and then 9, where I began newsreading and then did 9 years of Today's Show, which was newsreading and hosting, and then now back doing solely newsreading.
Mm. And what pulled you to Channel 9 more so than like Channel 7? Anything in particular?
Well, they pulled me. And it was a job opportunity I couldn't resist because you're too young to remember, but there was a guru newsreader at the time by the name of Brian Henderson, who is a Sydney institution, and he had been reading the news at that time for a lifetime.
It would have been early 70s, really, wasn't it?
I think so.
Post-Bandstand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when I went to Channel 9 in 2002, he had been instrumental in getting me across, which was a great compliment because he is, I think, one of the finest news readers the country's ever had. And what he didn't tell me was 6 months after I got there, he announced his retirement. But that was a real thrill to be in his orbit because he was such a wonderful, wonderful broadcaster and a thoroughly lovely man. So that was how I ended up at Channel 9, and lo and behold, I'm still there 21 years later, which I thought was a feat. I thought when I racked up 20 years that I was quite proud of that. I sort of thought, wow. And my teenagers said to me, couldn't you get a job anywhere else?
There you go.
Talk about deflating. They didn't see any kudos in being at the one network for 20 years. They thought I was actually a bit of a dud.
They should throw you a 21st now that you've got there. It's just
nothing like kids to just keep it very, very grounded.
I know.
What is the best piece of advice that you've ever received from somebody?
The greatest risk is not taking a risk.
That's it. That is such a good piece of advice. I mean, in any sort of situation, do nothing is an option. But in a life and a world that's constantly changing, it's a big risk to do nothing, to not move.
Couldn't agree more.
Yep.
If you could have one piece of advice, Georgie, what would it be?
I'll never forget reading the book Wonder with my kids. That book had just come out when they were primary school. Oh, my God, that book had me sobbing. It was such a beautiful book on so many levels. And there was a piece of advice in there that I have never forgotten. And I try and remember it sometimes when I'm, in certain situations. And that is, when given the choice between being right and kind,
choose kind.
Choose kind. It's beautiful advice, isn't it?
That was a really good book, yeah.
I loved that book too, Thomas, and it's interesting you remember that.
Yeah, I remember we used to read that in year 5, and then we went to the movies to go watch it when the movie came out as a whole school. And then I rewatched it recently. I watched it a couple of years ago.
Yeah, well, you I'm sure you picked up on that as well, but I've never forgotten it.
Mm.
when given the choice between when given the choice of being right or kind, choose kind.
Hey, Georgie, thanks so much for being with us here today. It's been really wonderful.
Tony, the pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for being interested enough to ask. And Thomas, I am watching you with great interest. I've got this sneaking feeling, Tony, that Thomas is going to be snapping at my heels.
Well, hopefully he is, and I'm sure he will be. Make sure to visit Sydney Catholic Schools' Facebook and Instagram, where we'll be giving you a sneak peek of what's in store for next time.
To find out more about the opportunities Sydney Catholic Schools provides its students in extracurricular activities and media studies, visit our website www.sydcatholicschools.nsw.edu.au.